Good evening. It's time for us to begin our worship service tonight. Certainly grateful for all who have chosen to be here tonight. Michael is not feeling well, and so he threw the microphone to me. So I guess I get to teach tonight. So we are on we're finishing up lesson number. What number is that? Finishing up 9, and we'll move on into lesson 10. Lesson 9, as you remember, was about marriage and some issues there, and lesson 10 is about meat sacrificed to idols. And Michael didn't leave me in a very good spot, so we'll fight our way through. We'll fight our way through with your all's help. We'll figure it out the best we can. So look forward to the study tonight, and again appreciate all for being here. And Robbie's going to lead our minds in prayer before we begin.
Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, we're so thankful for allowing us to get here safely tonight. We know there's storms around, but you got us here safely. We pray that our study tonight, Nikki leading our study tonight in Corinthians and learning more about their mistakes, and we're just mindful of that this could happen to any congregation, that we need to learn more about what your word tells us and follow it to the T. We're just so thankful that we have good leadership here at Southside and members here that are wanting to do what's right and studying your word and learning what you would have us do. We just pray that learning through the Corinthians that we can be more pleasing to you. We thank you for your Son who died for us, and the hope of heaven we have one day, and that's going to be a glorious day when we all meet you and your Son in heaven. That's our prayer in Christ's name. Amen.
Thank you very much. So Michael left us on, Sunday with the question that it didn't have a number, but the question on the marriage is comparing the 1 Corinthians 7, 12 and 13 with Ezra 10, 1 through 5. And what was going on there? And the question is, what is the similarities and what is different about it? And so you have to I guess we better go back and look at Ezra to make sure we know what we're talking about. So let's turn to Ezra chapter 10, verses 1 through 5 to get us started here tonight. Ezra 10. 1 through 5. So I'll read that. Now while Ezra was praying and while he was confessing, weeping, and bowing down before the house of God, a very large assembly of men, women, and children gathered to him from Israel, for the people wept bitterly. And Shechaniah, the son of Jehiel, one of the sons of Elam, spoke up and said to Ezra, "We have trespassed against our God and have taken pagan wives from the peoples of the land. Yet now there is hope in Israel in spite of this. Now, therefore, let us make a covenant with our God to put away all these wives and those who have been born to them, according to the advice of my master and of those who tremble at the commandment of our God, and let it be done according to the law. Arise, for this matter is your responsibility. We also are with you. Be of good courage and do it." Then Ezra arose and made the leaders of the priests, the Levites, and all Israel swear an oath that they would do according to his word. So they swore an oath. So somebody tell me a little background here. What's going on? What's Ezra dealing with here? And help me out a little bit.
Israelites had taken pagan wives.
Okay.
That was one of the things that God told them not to intermarry with the tribes around them.
Okay.
They were to stay pure.
The children of Israel, as Ms. Carroll says, were told not to intermarry with the tribes when they went into the land of Canaan. And Deuteronomy 7, I guess we'll look at that. Deuteronomy 7, verses 3 and 4. Somebody want to read that for us? Deuteronomy 7, verses 3 and 4 is where we get this command.
They will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods. So the
Okay, so the commandment that God gave was when you go into this land, you don't intermarry with the folks that are there. And the main reason, verse 4, so because they will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods. Do we know of any illustrations of where that happened? Just quick and easy off the top of our heads. Solomon. That's in 1 Kings. It is in 1 Kings. 1 Kings 11 and verse 2. And the exact same thing is said there. Solomon took several wives, right? How many? Wives and concubines, how many do you have? 700 wives. Solomon kind of broke that law, didn't he? 700 wives and 300 concubines in 1 Kings 11:2. So how did that work out for him? Somebody read that one.
Surely they will turn away your hearts after their gods. Solomon clung to these in love.
So Solomon certainly disobeyed God in that. And again, the commandment was in Deuteronomy, and we see that it was broken many times. Solomon is one of the greatest breakers of them all, I guess. So we see what Ezra, we see what it says there in Ezra. And we've already looked at 1 Corinthians 7:2, but let's go back there and see how they compare and how they are different is the question. 1 Corinthians 7:12 and 13. Somebody want to read that?
But to the rest, I, not the Lord, say, if any brother has a wife who does not believe, and she is willing to live with him, let him not divorce her. And a woman who has a husband who does not believe, if he is willing to live with her, let her not divorce him.
Okay, so we get to 1 Corinthians 7, Paul talking to these folks in Corinth, and he says, if you've got an unbelieving spouse, don't divorce them. Verse 14, for the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. It tells them not to divorce them. So Ezra says, you got to put them away. 1 Corinthians 7 says, do not put them away. So there, now we've got the context. So what are the similarities between the two? Okay, Ms. Carroll says they're both married to unbelieving wives. That is the similarity. Why is one of them said to stay with them and the other one says you got to put them away? What's the difference? Why? Look, is it a contradiction? Carol says we got Old Covenant and New Covenant.
Also, they had been specifically forbidden to do that. They were set apart as God's people first, and specifically forbidden to intermarry. In the New Testament, they were married first, then they became believers, and they given, like Ms. Carroll said, the new law.
Okay.
Frees them from the old law. And so that may account for the difference between, they weren't called apart first and taught that from a young age that you don't intermarry. They were intermarried first.
Okay. So I don't know if y'all heard Tara, but under the old law, the children of Israel, they were told from birth, you don't intermarry. And so they knew that their entire life, and they still broke that covenant. Under the Corinthians, some of these folks, they as we know about the Gentiles, they were worshiping false gods, they were worshiping idols. So they didn't know this about the law of marriage. And again, they're living under a totally new covenant. We're under a different time, but their marriages came before they knew what was right and what they should be doing. So there is some difference there.
Also be in verse 16, it says, for how do you know, O wife, whether you will save your husband, or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? So under the old law, they were Jews, but under the new law, they were both Jews and Gentiles that were able to be saved.
Yes.
So,
Yes, sir. I think certainly that Paul is saying that it's better to do all you can to stay in the marriage, and with the possibility that you may save that marriage. And we have all been witness to that over the years, or most of us I think have, that an unbelieving spouse, either way, male or female, they stay in the home and they try to make it work, and it works. It works. There's many, we know of that. We know in this congregation that's happened on several occasions. So staying in that marriage may not be the best one, may have difficulties, but stay with that and always be dedicated to God and do what's right. And who knows, you might convert that husband or that wife and save their soul, and then it makes it a wonderful situation. Other thoughts, comments on the what's the difference between Ezra and 1 Corinthians? I think one of the big things was God knew that these foreign wives back in Ezra, you know, they were idol worshipers. They were worshiping all kinds of different gods, and He knew, as with Solomon, that they would turn their hearts away from God. And I think that's a little different. We don't know that this unbelieving spouse or husband in 1 Corinthians would turn their heart away from God. They possibly could, but for sure it was something that was happening a lot in the Old Testament, and God was warning them about that. So it was okay in Ezra, but it's different. It's a new law, new time. We live under, Christians live under the new covenant, and Paul was telling them that, you know, it's just different. So I think helps us with the answer to that question. Anybody else got any thoughts on that?
The application of Ezra's, we shouldn't really even be friends with people who are going to lead us away from God. We should make good choices in who we associate with. Just like when we were talking about idol worship before in 1 Corinthians 15, where it talks about bad company corrupts good morals. So the application of Ezra is the same. We shouldn't follow people who are going to lead our hearts away from God. But if we're already in that union, when we become a Christian, we can spread the gospel to our family. And I think it says a lot about how important God views marriage too. Don't leave your spouse if you become a believer and they're not. That's not grounds for leaving. So how He views the union of marriage, how important He views that, and then just the application of Ezra, that all things are lawful, but not all things are helpful.
Yes.
We're not prohibited from marrying a non-Christian, but is it going to help us get to heaven to marry?
Good point. And we'll get to that. All things are lawful, but not all things are the best for us or expedient for us. And there's nothing wrong with marrying an unbeliever, but if you got the chance to, and you love both, I don't know if you can do that, an unbeliever and a believer, you better take the believer. I think your life would be better if you do that. But Ezra, great point that, you know, who we associate with makes a difference too. If you associate with good people, good Christian people, your life will probably be better than, for certain, if you associate with those who are ungodly and those who are doing things that God is certainly not pleased with. Okay, anything else on marriage? Good. We'll move on to, I guess good. Meat sacrificed to idols is a kind of an interesting topic as well. So lesson 10, meat sacrificed to idols. We start in 1 Corinthians 8. Also, if you'll note on your study guide that it's got 1 Corinthians 9, and then the second one says 2 Corinthians 10. That should be 1 Corinthians 10. We've got a typo there to help us. That'll help us get squared back up. So, meat sacrificed to idols. I think the best way to start that is just read. Chapter 8's not very long. We'll just read chapter 8. Try to figure out what's going on here. So we've just finished 7, talking about marriage, and then Paul changes subjects a little bit and starts talking about Christians and liberties and liberties and knowledge and love. I think are the 3 main topics here. We got We got some folks have got knowledge, and they think because they've got knowledge that they don't need love. And Paul kind of points out that that's not really true. It's not how it should be. Let's see. Zach, you want to read? How about reading 1 through 7 there? And somebody will read 8 through 13. Somebody will pick up on 8 and read through 13.
We are no worse off if we do not eat, and no better off if we do. But take care that this right of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. For if anyone sees you who have knowledge eating in an idol's temple, will he not be encouraged, if his conscience is weak, to eat food offered to idols? And so by your knowledge, this weak person is destroyed, the brother for whom Christ died. Thus sinning against your brothers and wounding their conscience when it is weak, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble.
Okay, so we've got a lot. We're eating meats. We got a lot to chew on here. We got a lot to chew on here about the liberties that we have as Christians and how far we can go with that and what we really have the right to do. I think one of the things that verse 1, and Michael's pointed out, I've got some of Michael's notes here, and he talked about this a little bit on Sunday. And I don't know how far to carry this, and I don't really know, exactly where all this comes from. But in a lot of versions of your Bibles, not in King James or New King James, but other versions, in verse 1, it's where it says, now concerning things offered to idols, we know that it's got quotation marks over we all have knowledge, saying the question that these Corinthians, we've talked about them before, they're a little bit proud, they're a little bit arrogant, and they may be the ones that Paul's quoting here who said, we've got all this knowledge, we're the smart ones, we've got this knowledge. But you get down to verse 7, and it says, however, Paul says there's not in everyone that knowledge. So you may think you've got that knowledge, Corinthians, but you really don't. Not everybody's got that knowledge. And so if you go at it that way, then the question that's asked there, what is the question that the Corinthians have asked Paul, and where do we go with that? So I'll let somebody else help me with that. So what do you think? There could be a couple of answers there, obviously, but guess what the Corinthian question was. Remember, the Corinthians have written him a letter asking him these different things. Paul's replying to that, and he starts there in verse 8. Now, concerning these things offered to idols. That's the question. You all have asked a question about it. What do we think their question was? Miss Carroll said, are we permitted to eat meat that has been sacrificed to idols? Sounds pretty, I would think that's what we would all most of the time agree with. I'll read you what Michael wrote down here. And he's kind of these Corinthians that may not be asking a question that they really, with the right heart, that they're kind of sarcastic in their asking of the question. He's wrote down his best guess is, the Corinthians, this is what they're saying. We all have knowledge that an idol is nothing in this world, and there is no God but one. Sure, that is true. Since that is true, should we not freely be able to eat of meat sacrificed in an idol's temple? So kind of what Carol said, but added a little more to that.
Yes, in the idol's temple.
Yeah,
I
not
think
only
that's the stumbling.
not only eat the meat, but also eat it in the idol's temple, which is talked about, which has become a stumbling block for some of them. So, what does God say about meat anyway? He made it.
It's all wonderful.
What 1 Timothy 4:4, everything is good, nothing to be rejected. We've got many verses. Let's see, other verses certainly that tell us that there's nothing wrong with eating meat or eating certain. Most in the New Testament, we can eat anything we really want to eat. So I'm getting on too far. Let's read the second question then. So, because we're talking about this knowledge, the Corinthians think they've got all knowledge. Why is knowledge dangerous? Is love always more important than knowledge? Why is knowledge dangerous? Is love always more important than knowledge? Okay?
Knowledge.
Okay, in verse 1, knowledge will puff you up. And where do we see that puffed up phrase in Corinthians already? Remember in 1 Corinthians 5, when he says, are you with the verse 2 there? Verse 1, it's actually reported there's sexual immorality among you, and such as not even married, not even named among the Gentiles, that a man has his father's wife, and you are puffed up. So these Corinthians have been told that they're puffed up a couple of times already. And verse 1 says, knowledge puffs up, but love edifies. So, somebody else, why is knowledge dangerous?
If our knowledge causes us to become proud and prioritize what we quote unquote know to be okay over and our right to practice that over someone else's conscience,
Okay.
then that knowledge suffocates love and places that person beneath us, which is not consistent with what Scripture tells us.
Okay. Tara said that knowledge suffocates the love that we should have. These Corinthians thought that because they had this knowledge and they knew that meat didn't mean anything, that they could eat it anytime they wanted to. It was their right. They had the liberty to eat it anytime they wanted to, and they didn't have to worry about what anybody else said. But Paul said, you're wrong. You're wrong. If you eat that meat and you cause a weak brother to stumble, then certainly you have sinned, and you have verse 12. But when you sin against the brethren and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Not only have you sinned, but you've sinned against Christ when you have caused this weak brother to sin. So, knowledge is good. There's nothing wrong with knowledge. But when you think you know everything, perhaps, and some of these Corinthians may have thought that, and they get arrogant, and then certainly the knowledge that they thought they had was overriding the love that they should have had for their weak brother. And Christ and Paul says, that's a sin. You can't do that. Verse 13, therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I'll never eat meat again. Paul said, I'll become a vegetarian if that's what it takes to keep my weak brother from stumbling. And so you can see the love there that he had. I mean, that's all about love for the weak brother and doing everything he could to keep the weak brother from stumbling. So I'll give you Michael's answer that he wrote down here. Part 2 of that, is love always more important than knowledge? Is love always more important than knowledge? I'll let somebody answer that first. Is love always more important than knowledge? And always is a long, big word. Okay, we can love. Anna said we can love somebody and give them all the love that we can, but we still know that there are people that are doing wrong, and that's, you know, we've got that knowledge that what they're doing is not right. So in her mind, love is, which one? Knowledge is, I forgot where you're at. I'm just, the question is.
In what she's saying, knowledge would be more important than love, because you can't love them into salvation.
Okay.
They need that knowledge.
Okay. Michael's 2 cents worth, he wrote, love is always more important, but lack of knowledge can make love misdirected. Love is always more important, but if you have lack of knowledge, like these Corinthians had here, they can make their love misdirected. So I think I kind of understand that. Makes sense to me. Anybody else, any thoughts on that question?
1 Corinthians 13:2.
Okay.
Though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, though I have all faith, so that I can remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing.
Okay. If you don't have love, you don't have anything. You got all these other abilities to do, but if you don't have love, then 1 Corinthians 13:2 tells us that we're missing out on things. So this meat sacrificed to idols. What about? And then the other question that it comes up, and it comes up in chapter 9 as well. They know that there's nothing. The meat is nothing. So they think it's okay for them to go eat it, but the other thing that they're doing is they go to these idol temples, and they're there where they're supposedly worshiping these false idols. And they're not going to eat the meat, but they're still going to the temples. Is that okay? Is it okay to go there even though you're not participating in what's going on?
I read it as there was a restaurant in this pagan temple.
Okay.
This meat was being served at this restaurant.
Okay.
You weren't worshiping the idols, but you were partaking of the meat, like, at a restaurant.
Okay.
And someone with, a weak Christian would see you in this situation and assume that you were worshiping idols too.
Okay.
That's the way I understand.
Okay, and I think that's true. But they say, and I've read that, and y'all probably read it as well, that most of the meat at this time came from this meat that was sacrificed to idols. Most of the meat that was available, either they gave a portion of that to the priest, and then the rest of it was, or the god, false god, whatever, and the rest of it was sold in the meat markets. And so 75-80% of all the meat that was available was meat that had been sacrificed to an idol. And if your conscience was not going to allow you to have that meat, then you better be careful what you're eating. There's not going to be, you better eat a lot of vegetables.
Yeah.
But as Carol said, there was also a place in the temple evidently where they were coming and partaking of these meats. And I think one of the questions, or one of the things that comes up, is it okay to go to that even though you're not partaking of the meat? And her thought was no, because the weak brother may see you there.
What does it mean by weak brother? Is it a lack of knowledge, or they're just new Christians and they just don't have the knowledge?
Yeah,
Is that what it means by
I think weak is the lack of knowledge.
So the Corinthians have the knowledge, but they're prideful and they don't want to give this knowledge to the weak. So is this part of what Paul's calling them out about? Because they're not really giving this knowledge about serving or...
Well, I mean, so I think that we've certainly got Corinthians that think they know it all. We've got a group of them that think they know it all. And then we've got other folks that I think weak means that they still think that meat is something that you shouldn't have. And Paul says, you got to be careful because these folks haven't gained the knowledge yet to understand that meat really doesn't mean anything. They can eat it if they want to. But if their conscience says, I can't do that, they're weak in their knowledge of what I think that's what the weak is. Now, there may be other people that think different about that, but you people who think you know it all, be careful because you think your knowledge allows you to do things that these people that are weaker, they don't have as much knowledge as you have, they still think it's wrong. So you better be careful about leading them in the wrong direction.
And Nikki, I don't know if it's in 8 or 9, but Paul says if you go to have a meal with another person, and they say this is the meat that was sacrificed to idols, you're best off not to eat the meat.
Okay?
Because this person has pointed this out, and this may be, they have some feelings about this.
Okay.
That, this was a pagan worship.
So let's see, does anybody know where that's at? So Carol's pointing out that if you go to someone's house to have a meal and it's fine to have meat, it's fine to have that meat, but if somebody there points out, hey, this was meat that was sacrificed to idols, then at that point you say, well, I better not have that. I better stay away from that because it might cause somebody else for their conscience to overtake them. And that is in, you may know where that's at. Anybody see that? I forgot where that was at. 10:27. Okay. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 27 and 28. I'll just start at verse 23 and read a few of those verses there. 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 23, Paul continues this through 8, 9, and 10. A lot of the time, the same topic about this meat eating. In verse 23, he says, all things are lawful for me. Again, I can eat anything I want, really, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but not all things edify. I've still got to be careful. I got the freedom, I got the right to eat it, but under certain circumstances, I should not partake of it. Let no one seek his own, but each one the other's well-being. Again, looking after the other fella. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market, asking no questions for conscience sake. If you're fine with this and you know that meat doesn't mean anything, then you can eat whatever you want. For the earth is the Lord's and all of its fullness. There it is again. Everything God made is okay to eat. Verse 27, if any of those who do not believe invite you to dinner and you desire to go, eat whatever is set before you, asking no questions for conscience sake. Nothing's brought up. Nothing says anything about the meat. It's okay to eat it. But, verse 28, but if anyone says to you, this was offered to idols, do not eat it for the sake of the one who told you and for conscience sake, for the earth is the Lord's and all its fullness. Conscience, I say, not your own, but that of the other. For why is my liberty judged by another man's conscience? But if I partake with thanks, why is evil spoken of for the food over which I give thanks? Therefore, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. Give no offense either to the Jews or to the Greeks or to the church of God, just as I also please all men in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of many, that they may be saved. I think that summarizes a little bit of Paul's thoughts on that. Meats are from God, they're okay to eat, but if my eating meat's going to affect a younger, possibly younger, less knowledgeable Christian about that fact, and it's still a problem with him, he's just come out of worshiping these false gods and going to these immoral temples, and he's wanting to get as far away from that as he can, and he knows that meat may have come from that place, then I'm going to do everything I can to not offend his conscience and make sure that nothing I do is going to cause him to sin. Thoughts, comments?
Asking questions like, is it okay for me to do this? Or is it wrong for me to do this? Is that the approach we should be taking? Or should we be asking, what can I do to glorify God? Or what can I do to help others?
Okay.
To me,
Okay? So Tara says, for you all that couldn't hear her, when people ask questions about what can I do, or how things that get in gray areas, how close can I get to that gray area? Is that what they should be asking, or should be asking, what do I need to be doing to glorify God? Not worry how close I can get to that line, and do I step over that line when I do this? You just need what can I be doing to glorify God? And I think that's a great point. If we had that in our mind, then we probably wouldn't try to think of how close can I get to do that sin without actually committing that sin.
It just seems like they were kind of saying, well, can I go to the temple and eat at the restaurant? Well, no, probably shouldn't do that. Well, can I just go to the temple and not eat?
Yeah.
Like, how close can I get to going back to that pagan temple without becoming pagan again? Versus, should I be going near that place?
Yeah.
Or should be out here evangelizing or whatever?
In our vernacular, can I go sit down at that bar with my friends? I'm not going to drink, but can I go sit down at that bar with my friends and let's just talk and have a great time? Yeah, you can, but is that really what a Christian should be doing? And what kind of influence does that have on a weaker Christian who walks in and says, hey, there's Mickey, he looks like he's having a big time at the bar. I guess it's okay. And yeah, so I think that's an application for us, you know. We got to be careful. We got to. Our conduct needs to be that would glorify God. And if it doesn't, then we probably need to think about, is that really what we need to be doing? Other thoughts? Things we need to think about? Other things that we need to be thinking about along those lines? His other question here is about, he says, if idols are nothing, Paul said that in 1 Corinthians 8:4. He said, idols are nothing, meats sacrificed to idols are nothing. If they're nothing, then in 1 Corinthians 10:20 and 21, how can sacrificing to them be participation with demons? So that's the question. If it's nothing, then how can he go on later and say sacrificing to them is participation with demons? Anybody got any thoughts on that one? Okay. Right. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Those are very, very, very good thoughts. I appreciate that very much. Michael wrote down here to that question, just because the idol is nothing does not mean that worship to the idol is nothing. I think that's a little bit what Zach was pointing out. The idol really was nothing, but the fact that they would sit down and worship that idol, and as he pointed out, these demons tried to raise these idols to be false gods, greater false gods than the one before. If a former pagan feels the eating of sacrificed meat is participating in that worship, he certainly should stay away from that. And I think we all would agree to that. Let's see, last question or close to the last question. So a question for the class, and Michael may come back with these, but this last question he wrote down here. So we've been through all this, and so could Christians, these Corinthian Christians, could they eat meat sacrificed to idols? Yes or no? Is that a yes or no question? Could they? Or should they? Okay, so if there's nobody it's going to offend, it was fine. You know, we've got Romans 14:14, 1 Corinthians 8:18, other verses say it is fine. It makes no difference. That makes no difference. But if there's some around that are weaker, if it distresses our brethren, it is certainly not worth it, and we should stay away from it. Romans 14:15 and 1 Corinthians 8, 9, and 13. So it depends on the situation. It was fine, but if it was going to cause a weaker brother a problem, then certainly we have to stay away from it. He wrote down another question here. Is it more important for us as Christians to be seen as correct or as encouraging and loving? Okay, to 1 Corinthians 13:2. If we don't have love, then some of this other stuff it doesn't profit us at all. Now, we're seeking for knowledge. That's why we're here tonight. We want to know as much as we can about God and about His Word so that we can be right. So knowledge is not a terrible thing. You're never going to have as much as you need. But if that overrides the love of your brethren and you think you're so smart that other brothers are weak and they're just not where they need to be, and I'm smarter than they are, then you've got a real problem, and you got a love problem. You need to be loving your brothers in those situations for sure. So we haven't talked about Romans 14, so I'm sure Michael will probably get into that. So I would suggest that you look at Romans 14 again, a great chapter that talks about our liberties and what we have the right to do and what we as Christians should not do. So having the right to do something doesn't mean we're free to do it at all times. I think we've already seen that. Just because we have the right to eat meat doesn't mean at all times that we should be doing that, and that's what Paul was telling the Corinthians there. Another comment, maintaining the unity of the Spirit in the bond of love may require a believer to give up his personal right to a thing. And it quotes Psalms 133:1, how good and pleasant it is when brothers live together in unity. Certainly Christ prayed for unity, and many opinion things can cause division in the church, and we've all seen that happen before. And I think these verses about meat sacrificed to idols, although it probably doesn't apply much to us today, gives us some insight on how we should act in situations that come up in this life. So thank you very much, and look forward till Sunday morning.